Part 3. Inward pain turned into an outward handicap. 16 years after my first dysfunctional depression, I again suffered from depression. This happened after the birth of our fourth daughter and undergoing brain tumor surgery 3 weeks later. It manifested itself physically through a handicap that stripped me of my ability to move my legs normally and left me in a wheelchair part of the time for nearly 18 months. My doctor called it a conversion reaction. Chapter 9, Accepting Things the Way They Are, Again. Down again, this time with pregnancy. The year was 1988. Nearly 2 years had passed since I had recovered from my last bout of depression, and I was stable on lithium. Yet there was a change in the wind. After waiting 6 years for a baby, we were excited to learn that I was pregnant with our fourth child. I became very nauseated with my pregnancies, and this one was no different. Tiffany was now 6 years old, Heidi was 9, and Cindy was 11. They all took turns, along with Dan, to empty my throw-up buckets. I chose to stay on lithium because I had a friend who had gone through pregnancy safely while taking it. Lithium had no ill effects on my baby either. 6 months into my pregnancy, however, I suddenly lost all hearing in my right ear. A number of tests determined that the hearing loss had nothing to do with my medication or pregnancy. It appears to be a very slow-growing acoustic neuroma brain tumor. But we can't confirm our suspicions until after the baby is born and we are able to do an MRI, the doctor explained. About that time, I also developed some symptoms of having blood clots, as I had in past pregnancies, so I was sent to bed for 3 months before the baby was born. At night and during quiet moments of the day, I was reminded of my tumor by a sound similar to chimes in my right ear. My doctor indicated that this was a common symptom accompanying acoustic neuroma tumors, but still I was plenty scared. My fear came from both the known and the unknown. My aunt had died of a brain tumor at age 19, and my sister had almost died of one during high school. The unknown plagued me because although this particular type of tumor was different, I just didn't know what would happen. As time rolled on, depression returned, and despite taking my lithium, once again I relied on prayer and cognitive therapy to process my thought distortions and feelings. Because I had to find something productive to do, I braided bar stool covers for the kitchen and made bassinet blankets and bumpers for my unborn baby girl. As for the fear that surrounded my brain tumor, I had to practice trusting in God. I didn't know how I would get through this. I only knew that there was purpose in my experiencing it. Just in case I died, I put books together for each of my children and my husband with pictures and a special letter. I also cried a lot as I wondered, what if my baby never knows me? What if I never see my daughters marry? What if Dan remarries and my children are raised by a stepmother? Will she love them as I do? What will life be like on the other side? I felt like Frankenstein. A week after our baby, Patricia Potts, was born, my doctors performed an MRI that confirmed an acoustic neuroma brain tumor located near the ear canal. The tumor would eventually grow around the brainstem if not removed. The tumor, although probably not malignant, was dangerous and could cause loss of hearing, loss of balance, and eventually death if left untreated. A few weeks later, my sister Cindy and her husband Larry took care of our newborn baby, and I underwent brain tumor surgery. The tumor did turn out to be benign. Although I lost my balance nerve on one side, The doctors were able to perform the surgery before it totally destroyed all of my hearing on the right side. After 5 days of intensive care, I was given a private room next to a helicopter pad. The room spun each time I closed my eyes, and my world continued to spin out of control. The first time I sat up and changed into my own pink fuzzy nightgown, Dan was there to help me. On the side of the wall stood a mirror, rectangular and impersonal. As I clung to Dan, trying to reorient myself to my surroundings, I spotted myself in the mirror. Ugly was the first word that sprang to my mind, and then grotesque, and finally Frankenstein. My brown hair had been shaved completely on the right side of my head and replaced with several bold black stitches starting behind my ear and continuing around the right side of my face. I was shocked as I confronted the reality of what I saw. Despair welled up in my heart and began spilling over as tears. And then the warmth of Dan's brown eyes captured mine, and he simply declared, "You're beautiful." His love somehow stilled the storm and brought calm to my heart as I took my first shaky steps back to balance. Maybe you need to accept things the way they are. Dan's family and my family were both very helpful during my recovery, but it was still long and difficult. Headaches were vicious and frequent. At the 8-month mark after surgery, I was still struggling with frequent head pain. Discouragement haunted my days because my recovery had taken so long. One afternoon, as I was lying at the edge of my bed crying, my mom came into my room. I had called Mom earlier and asked her to take over with the kids because I was down with still another headache. "I don't know how to do this mom thing," I sobbed. "I have 3 kids and a new baby, and I can't even take care of myself, let alone them. When will I ever be well enough to be counted on? When can I count on myself? When can Dan and the kids or anyone else count on me?" She let me cry as she gently stroked my head and then said, "Do you remember the classes you used to teach on overcoming depression?" I nodded my head. "Do you remember the 3 stages of grief? Denial, acceptance, and rebuilding? Maybe it's time that you move to acceptance. Maybe you need to accept that you may always have intermittent head pain. Maybe you need to make arrangements for possible sitters each day and just accept that as part of life from now on, instead of fighting it every time a headache comes." I don't remember much more of our conversation before she quietly stole away to take care of the house, the kids, and the meals, but I do recall drying my tears and trying to move into acceptance. I talked to Dan that night about accepting things the way they were. Part of my anxiety and depression slept off my back as my focus shifted from my own self-defeating behaviors to acceptance and hope. Acceptance led to rebuilding. My feelings of futile powerlessness began to be replaced with a kind of spunky protectiveness as I learned preventative measures, such as nutrition, chiropractic care, and some alternative medication. I typed up a paper that included names and phone numbers of people who were willing to take over for me if I needed it. The paper also listed ideas for medications and what to do to ease my head pain, such as chiropractic, cold packs, etc. When the inevitable pain arrived, I pulled out my large print paper and followed the course of action I had previously outlined. When I was in pain, it was hard to open my eyes, let alone think very well. The paper took over the thinking process, allowing me to focus on moving through my list. I found new medications that helped me with my headaches, and I also learned that I was allergic to monosodium glutamate, MSG. I found that MSG was in many foods, including ramen noodles and many Chinese foods, and that just a little of it could make me ill for hours. I kept a calendar of how often and how severe the pain from my headaches was. Within months I began to see improvement. Pain became less devastating and didn't impact me as much or as often. My life took on a more predictable rhythm, and family life became more enjoyable. I think we're supposed to have a son. When Tricia was less than 2 years old, Dan asked, "How would you feel about adding a son to our family?" I looked at him and wondered where he had left his brains. After the tumor and blood clots, I had been placed on blood thinners and had been advised that it would be unwise to have more children and had my tubes tied. I couldn't have more children. Dan said he thought there was a boy for us and suggested that we consider adopting. His proposal seemed absurd to me. Ridiculous, unbelievable. We already had our family. God had decided how many children we would have, and we already had them, I reasoned. I wanted to dismiss the whole idea. In the past, I had always been the one begging for another baby, but not this time. Now Dan was the driving force, and I didn't even want to discuss it. That is, until we went to Disneyland. When Tricia was 3, we took the family to Disneyland. After a full day of fun, Dan went to get the car while I rounded up the kids to meet him. We had just left the front gates and were crossing the grass when suddenly I panicked. I knew someone was missing. I whipped around and asked, "Who's missing?" I counted noses, heads, and faces. My mind told me that I had 4 daughters plus 1 niece. That equals 5. There were 5, but my heart told me there should be 6 standing before me. All right, Dan, you win. I knew that the feeling I had was the Lord's way of letting me know that we were indeed missing a child. Now I joined Dan in earnest as we began our quest to find our son. It would take over 2 years and some very difficult experiences in the process before our son, Joseph Nicholas Potts, joined our family. Tricia was 6 and Joseph was 5.5 years old.